There's a version of SEO that still sounds deceptively simple. Write the right headline, rank on Google, collect the traffic. But that version of the internet is disappearing fast. What replaces it is messier, more fragmented, and a lot more human. Louisa Frahm has spent the better part of the last decade inside that shift. She's led SEO strategy at E! Online, Yahoo, TMZ, People, Entertainment Weekly, and the LA Times, worked as a Google Trends curator, and most recently served as SEO director at ESPN. This conversation is also a bit of a retrospective. Louisa recently made the decision to step away from ESPN after building its SEO program essentially from scratch. She's candid about why. After a decade plus of going hard in some of the fastest newsrooms on the internet, she recognized it was time to slow down. My co-host, Constance Chen, joins me for this one, and together we unpack how Louisa turned skeptical editors into SEO allies, how she used Google Trends to surface the questions real people are actually asking, and the evergreen content system she's built at ESPN. We also get into AI overviews, TikTok search behavior, and why Louisa believes the best SEOs aren't really SEOs anymore. They're audience strategists. I think you're really going to like this one. Louisa has that rare combination of newsroom instincts, platform fluency, and the ability to make complicated ideas feel clear without flattening them. If you learned something new today, take a second to subscribe to the Page 2 podcast. Leave us a rating or review, and let us know what resonated. We'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to episode 113 of the Page 2 podcast. I'm your host, John Clark, and I'm excited to welcome my guest host today, Constance Chen, SEO director at Moving Traffic Media. Today, we're joined by one of news SEO's most credentialed practitioners, former Google Trends curator turned ESPN SEO director who has shaped search strategy at 6 major media brands across a decade-plus career. I can already tell this conversation is going to be a fun one. Louisa Frahm, welcome to the show.
Hello. Wow, I am blushing. That was a very nice introduction. And yes, it's been a wild ride, but a very fulfilling one. So I'm stoked to jump into all of my related nuggets throughout that career.
And friendly disclaimer, when we first decided to relaunch the podcast, you were one of the first people we reached out to, and we've gone back and forth trying to figure out the right time to get you on. So we're excited to finally get you here.
For sure, it's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
You sort of had this recent transition away from ESPN. You had a great post on LinkedIn about that. Anything you want to share about that transition, sort of how that career trajectory is changing?
Yeah. So, first off, this was a monumental chapter of my career that I had at ESPN. I really feel, in many ways, and I should say it in that post, but I meant it, my whole life was kind of building to this. I come from a family where, we're not religious, but the closest thing is sports. And, this really, in many ways, just felt like reaching the mountaintop of that. And I had worked in news SEO, at many different publishers, where I had, kind of honed this skill set. And then this was the ultimate toolkit to work with. So I treated it extremely seriously. I definitely came from that sort of, personal background where a lot of the time it didn't feel like work because I knew like I would be watching this game anyways. I would be tuned into the, whatever it was anyways. So it was an incredible ride, in so many different aspects. I think what ended up kind of bringing on the transition was, just realizing, and this is good for anyone to know who gets into news SEO and is in the world that I've been in, it's very fast paced. I've been going very hard, for over a decade at it. I've been incredibly proud of what I've accomplished. But I think, I turned 35 over the summer, and there was just a certain part of that felt a little bit heavier maybe than expected. And it's always good for anyone who works in news to really pay attention to those signals. And if, your body is kind of telling you like, hey, this is great work that you're doing, but maybe something needs to shift, whether that's in your personal life or, any other aspects of what's going on, you should listen, because life is short. And I did feel like I had certain, aspects of my personal life that I needed to tend to. And unfortunately, I couldn't continue with ESPN, but I also knew that it was the right time. And the biggest thing for me that I was so proud of with this role that I was in was that I was, I came in starting something from scratch, which is always a bit intimidating, but I, really put in my full 120% effort to get it to a place where I, could feel really proud of what the legacy was and, see it take off and shine in the hands of, my team, who will continue to do great work. So that like final product really made me feel like it was okay to make this transition, because we had really put in the effort to create a foundation that would be lasting. And And I'm so excited to see, what my team does with it in the future. And I'll always be, a lifelong fan of ESPN. So it all added up to the right thing.
I love that.
You have such an extensive background in news SEO, and I'm sure many SEOs who work in media tend to struggle with, getting editorial buy-in. I'm sure you've experienced this. You run into all kinds of pushback, whether it's because editors or writers or the team just wants to maintain their integrity of voice or editorial style. They just want to stay away from certain language and such. But I'm curious to know, from your long experience in working in the newsroom, especially in these high pressure environments, how do you go about turning a very skeptical editor into like an SEO ally? And what are some of those exercises you use to get that buy-in?
I love this question because it comes up often, and I'm always very proud to give the same answer, to start in the same place. You really need to start with a clean slate in any newsroom that you come into. Now that I've been I've had the privilege of working for so many different brands that I respect and admire, you're always going to come in kind of inheriting some other stuff, right? Because no newsroom is like, well, unless, you're truly starting with like a startup. But I'm saying a lot of, since I've worked in enterprise newsrooms, there are well-established like best practices. They could have had, consultants who had come in and given different types of guidance in the past. What I found works the best is really trying to clean that slate right away and just make sure that, you put training at the forefront before you especially start giving any kind of like guidance or demands, which I never recommend, by the way, just as an approach. And in that process, I would say what you should also couple with that is respect. First and foremost, we come from very different worlds. And in news SEO, when we're working with black and white journalists, and then you're coming from this, like, what can oftentimes feel kind of foreign news SEO, technical sort of, methodology. So I always lead with respect. I want the folks that I work with to know, even though we come from different worlds, I have, immense appreciation for what you do. And also with the training comes right out the gate, I'm not trying to be a foreign body. I'm trying to get more eyeballs on your content. I'll go back to this from my very start in SEO, actually. I was at an agency, and it's called W Promote. It's fantastic. It's in Los Angeles. Shout out to W Promote. I had multiple mentors there who were fantastic to me, but one of them in particular, I still shout him out all the time, and maybe it embarrasses him, but his name was Matt Souza, and he left a really significant imprint on me, because when I was first starting out in SEO, it definitely was overwhelming. It was like, oh my God, what do I make of this? I'm not naturally a technical person, so it was a lot to take on at first. And what I loved about Matt was that his whole approach was, I know this might seem technical, let me break it down into simple and easy to understand terms. Let me demystify it. And he always had an aura of being extremely knowledgeable, but being very approachable. And I always give him credit for that, because that was at a very important phase of my career. I was just starting out. And when I saw it, I was like, that's what I want to be. I want to emulate that. I want to be someone that people can wrap their arms around in terms of what I'm saying. And obviously we have some incredibly brilliant minds in the world of SEO, and I have immense respect for them. I just knew that my path, especially once I got into newsrooms, was going to be really breaking things down into simple, easy to understand terms. So that goes back to your question of training, and where it starts, I think, is creating a language that people can understand, right? And that helps to make you less of a foreign body and more something that's new, but maybe exciting, something that could actually benefit newsrooms and the goals that they're trying to achieve. And so I would definitely stress that. You need to kind of, go after whatever that previous, set of best practices was. That's really important too. Get to the bottom of it. What confused you in the past? What did you hear? You can't skirt around that. That's the only way that you're going to truly clear the slate. So ask those questions, go after those answers, because that's what's going to allow you to set a better foundation and more efficient best practices moving forward. So I would say being really proactive about that makes a huge difference. And then doing actual training sessions, obviously. So once you've kind of had some of those initial conversations, you figure out where the pain points were, you figure out where some of the gray areas are, doing, those formal training sessions, with the right decks, like covering the right themes, that's going to be, crucial, right? And just like having an actual deliverable that people can go back to again and again. Like, when I was at ESPN, we had both the training deck, but we also had like a 1-page cheat sheet. And people really like that, where it's like, here's a quick hit sort of list of, the different elements that you should be aware of. Another really big thing I would push for with training, because can you tell I like training? I love training. I think it's a really critical part of making any newsroom SEO, strategy work. But making sure that folks know training never really ends. I think it's a consistent thing. And I say that for myself. I say that for the people I work with. I say that for everybody who's out there. We should always be trying to learn from one another. So in any newsroom, I would highly recommend having some sort of central communication channel. So whether that's Slack or Teams, whatever it might be for your particular group, encouraging the writers and the journalists that you work with to flag their stories in there, have that, regular exchange of information, be providing that guidance, because one of the easiest ways to kind of like drop off in training and then maybe get back into a gray area is to, lose some of that regular communication. So really encourage that. And then also, once you've started giving enough suggestions, you feel like you're getting into a flow with something. I literally was a cheerleader when I was in high school. But I'm kind of known as a cheerleader and I hope so in the, the SEO industry. Any person I've worked with in a newsroom could tell you, I'm a big believer in receipts. So I always tell, any of my team members, and I do this myself, that once you've given enough suggestions, go the extra mile and really look up whatever that search term was that you were targeting with that guidance that you gave. If there are those positive results, take a screenshot. I'm all about receipts, and share that with that editor. So then you're really reinforcing the work that we just did made this kind of an impact, whether that's like looking at your internal analytics and seeing a certain number that you like, or seeing an AI overview that you captured, seeing something in top stories. You really want to pass on that evidence, because that's what can reinforce the investment and make them think, hey, like this actually is something that's really benefiting the objective that I had. Let's keep working together. So I could talk all day about it, but those would be some of my favorite things about training and starting brand new.
I think the receipt comment is just so underrated.
Yeah.
I feel like
Don't sleep
that
on
simple
receipts.
screenshot isn't talked about enough. It's so valuable.
Yeah. The one thing I will say, it clogs up my desktop to no end. Like I have so many receipts on my desktop, but if it makes my computer run a little bit slower, it's okay. I'll take it.
Very good.
Yeah. So I love it.
So I wanted to jump to Google Trends maybe, and you have sort of an insider's view into Google Trends, or at least you did at one point.
Right.
So maybe take us through, you had a comment like the sphere of questions was something that I came across, sort of the who, what, why, how queries, and to really focus on that when you're looking at sort of Google Trends data. Can you take us into that a little bit more? Like explain how you would use Google Trends to get down to that level of insight.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was really fortunate to work for Google Trends actually right before I was at ESPN and work on the Trends, curator team and see how things, kind of work behind the curtain, which was really valuable. But even before that, I always tell people I'm not a hashtag ad for them. They have just really helped me in my career from the very beginning. Even when I was at my agency, they were extremely beneficial. And what I really like about Google Trends and why I would, pick it above like any other tool that's out there when it comes to news SEO specifically is just how granular and timely it can get in very, very tight windows. So when you're working in like breaking news specifically, I love the past hour filter in Google Trends, because you can literally look up something that's just happening in the separate, kind of keyword search. And then the money for me, really, even though there's value in both top queries and rising queries, I really find Google Trends to shine. It obviously shines in a lot of different ways, but the rising queries are excellent for content ideation. So you had asked about like, how do you surface the questions? How do you find these topics that you could jump on? I really love doing those standalone searches with, if it is something that's a true breaking news window, like past hour, past 4 hours, and then going down into rising queries. And that's where, those questions will surface. You can just go through and kind of scrape them and, be able to see, hey, is there something here that would directly cater to my audience? So absolutely believe in that. And then, in the, more real-time section of Google Trends, the trending now section, that does like the work for you. At my team at ESPN, like we were providing daily reports on that, twice a day, actually, just to show people like what are the topics that people care about most, in the morning and then also in the afternoon. So if you click into those individual modules, that's where you can also see questions being surfaced. I also really like the fact that Google Trends, again, and, kind of eliminating some of the grunt work, does curated homepages for different topics that'll pop up on its like general homepage. But if there's something like an election going on, or maybe the Oscars or the Super Bowl, they'll do standalone pages. The Olympics, and that's where you can also pull questions, and you know that they're being curated by their in-house experts. Highly recommend signing up for their daily newsletter. Same sort of thing. That's where you get it in your inbox Monday through Friday, and you'll get those questions. It's curated around what are the biggest topics of that day, and then that also allows you to directly transfer whatever that question is over into a piece of content. And I say this all the time, and it's funny. I don't know when it became my mantra, but then I started having people quote it back at me. I was like, this must work or something. But simple is not stupid, and I really believe in that. And that's why I've championed utility content my entire career. And I think it goes back to some of my roots I was discussing of like, I had a great mentor in the very beginning who really taught me that like, hey, if you talk to people in terms that they can understand, you will make an impact. Like, you will build relationships and get to the goals that you're trying to achieve. So I'm just a big believer in questions for that reason. Because a lot of the time in SEO, we do talk about the fact that we have like limited character count, right? Like, we only have so much space where we can convey what we want to say in a headline. But the amazing part about questions is that it's kind of like a loophole for that, because most of the time you have to avoid conversational phrases or things like, if you're really thinking about just a straightforward SEO headline, like, here are the doesn't contribute anything. But questions are really an exception to that, because think of how often people search with a question. So I really love using Google Trends to directly pinpoint what are those questions. Then you can construct your headlines around that. Google Trends in the same way is also really helpful whenever you're doing bigger guides around something and you're maybe beyond just the headline, but you want to target your sub headlines around certain things. Because that's another really effective way to use questions within like a bigger guide, is making the sub headlines questions. That particular, side of Google Trends can also be really helpful. Yeah. And then also when it comes to Google Trends, I was going over the breaking news side of it and how you can do it in those tight windows. I also really like seeing on more of like an evergreen point of view. So maybe even like the past 5 years or since 2004, which is technically like the all-time view. What are questions that pop up every single year over year, right? Evergreen content, when, handled appropriately, can still have a place within your brand, right? You just need to make sure that you're refreshing it appropriately. So I also like, kind of pinpointing those types of themes too, where I know that my audience will come back to this year after year. Like a good example of that right now, in sports would be like, I can guarantee you this week, because I just saw it again, but people are searching for when are, March Madness brackets released. Like, people are looking for that right now. Yep. So, it's always important to just balance the breaking news side of things. What are the breakout questions that people have with those evergreen kind of queries that can drive consistent traffic over time?
I love that you have so many different ways for how to use Google Trends. I mean,
I could talk all day.
You're one of those rare cases where, as an SEO professional, you got to be on the inside at Google and kind of be inside the belly of the beast in some degree.
It's very
What's
cool.
something about Google Trends and how it's engineered that you think would genuinely surprise people in our field?
Let's see. In terms of like a surprise, I mean, I guess I would just go back to, what I was saying about, and I know I already said it, but I would just reinforce it. I think sometimes people overcomplicate like things that shouldn't be overcomplicated, and that is something that like so many news SEOs I know run into, where, again, it's part of the delicate dance and making sure that you really maintain those relationships, right? And that respect with the more traditional editorial side and what you're trying to do on the SEO side. Because, sometimes with like more traditional editors, it might be a thing of like, oh, I don't want to like give it all away. People, you could hear it sometimes that like, that's too simple, right? That's too simple to do. And that's where like, I would really go back to the magic of Google Trends. And I would tell people to like, not sleep on it, right? Is that you will see simple things in there, dismiss them. And obviously this is on a scale for your newsroom. And I would say that to anybody, right? Like, we all know it all exists, having worked in multiple newsrooms, where it's like, we know kind of what the line is and like what we would cover above the line versus maybe stay away from. But that is one thing that I would really say about Google Trends is sometimes you might be thinking like, I need something that's like very explosive or like something that's like outside the box, but simple is not stupid. And I really believe in that. And especially if like you're seeing something pop up like again and again and again in different searches, you shouldn't be ignoring that. And I think sometimes that debate has come up in newsrooms where I've worked in, where it's like, is that too simple for us? And I would encourage anyone who's like looking at Google Trends to really take a close eye at those types of examples, because like truly, I mean, that is why like utility content exists. And like if that many people are searching for it and the data backs it up and you're seeing it again and again and again, don't try to overcomplicate that, or like, and again, all within reason, it's subjective, but talk yourself out of something where like that the interest is clearly there, And so that's one thing that I would definitely say about like Google Trends is, you, and obviously it's great to see the ones that are like more unique kind of searches and you maybe didn't expect it, but don't sleep on things that keep popping up that may seem more simple in nature, because even if it's not going to be its own like standalone piece, that could also be, good ground for a subheadline within like a bigger guide. Like there's always some way that you can apply it. So that would be like one big thing that would come to mind of just like the data that you see in there. There are many kind of hidden aspects to Google Trends that I really like, but one that I love if you're in more like local news, because now I've been on in more of like a big publisher sort of environment. But when I was at the LA Times, I really loved using the regional aspect of the tool where you could actually like, I'll give you a great example because I survived working at the LA Times during the pandemic. It was 2.5 very, very eventful years. And I was the only SEO for the whole newsroom. So I did a lot of work with Google Trends. And I'll give you an example of, there, obviously, we were very, very focused on COVID and every single component of that pandemic. But vaccines were a very buzzy topic, right? And the searches that would go on for vaccines in Los Angeles County were very different from Orange County, for example, right? So I love the regional tool because that's where you can actually like look up a standalone search and really narrow the insights that you're getting down into that sort of granular format of like, hey, if I'm going to target this particular population, I could skew the coverage this way. If I'm going to target this population, I might want to angle it slightly differently. So I really do love that particular part of it too. There's so many other things I could mention, but those are just like two things that kind of come up off the top of my head.
Well, maybe one thing. I don't know if you use any plugins that sort of sit on top of Google Trends. So, for example, one of my favorites is Glimpse.
Yeah.
It sort of repositions and reorganizes data a little bit. Are there any others that you would recommend, or I don't know, maybe it's a
Glimpse
feature
is my
from one of
main
these that you would
use. Yeah, so you already mentioned the main one that I use. I do like getting a little bit more granular with it. Yeah, and I mean I use it for the same exact reason that you had brought up. So just getting that little bit of extra insight I think is helpful. I would go back to kind of what I said about Google Trends is that the more you play with it, I feel like we say this in the SEO industry sometimes, right? It's like tools are fantastic, absolutely, but you should feel like they aren't complicating your life. They should be like making things easier, ideally. And I think what I found over the years in working with Google Trends is I do like Glimpse, and I have that like on my profile, and I use that regularly. But other things have maybe like overcomplicated the process a little bit when in the moment I'm so used to and kind of engineered to just rely on the platform itself. So the Glimpse is fantastic, and I would recommend that people add that.
Got it. You did reference refreshing content. So I wanted to dig in there a little bit because I feel like
big one, yeah.
in this age, well, it's super important for news, but also now in the age of LLMs where we're seeing basically them defer to content that is less than 12 months old,
Totally.
some cases 13 weeks. It seems like such a even more important for everybody to be focused on. And I've heard you reference like re-optimization as sort of a minute by minute practice, which I think is probably more geared toward a newsroom, but would love to get your thoughts on, how you approach refreshing a piece of content, whether it is a breaking news piece or maybe even something that's evergreen, which is probably more applicable to, larger groups.
Absolutely. So this has become really like a cornerstone of, the content initiative that I was running at ESPN over the last like 2.5 years. That's why, like, again, I feel so fortunate for what this most recent chapter was. It gave me resources that I didn't previously have in terms of, having a freelance writer and being able to really invest in an SEO content operation. And I know that that's not to be taken lightly. It was a huge privilege to have that. And it allowed me to experiment a lot with like what works, what doesn't, what what is most efficient, especially when it came to news. And what I found with that, and I'm happy to go into both like kind of the breaking news side of updates, but also the evergreen side, is that absolutely freshness matters. So I'll start with, in the industry, I know we've all read these articles. There's been a lot of like this talk of SEO is dead. SEO is dead. And, I have my friends and my family who send me this and they're like, are you still have a job? Do you still have a job? So yes, like these things come up all the time. I firmly believe that SEO is not dead. I hope to still be, employed and, pursuing this profession. But off of that, I would say that certain, principles and practices that previously worked have been fading into the background a little bit or aren't as effective in this era that we're going through, right? This giant evolution that SEO is going through, because that's what I think is happening with AI. And off of that, to touch on what you had mentioned, AI loves freshness. Like it does. I mean, it's a huge, huge element that you have to consider if you want to be ranking in those modules that are already very small, right? You have to be factoring that in. So off of that, I would go back to, this strategy that I was running and that I was testing of it's kind of a multi-step process of updates. First off, the brainstorming process is obviously very important. Trend forecasting. So that's more on the evergreen side, but you want to be predicting where your audience is going to go, right? And that's really going to vary depending on what your individual newsroom is, what your beats are, like knowing your audience. I say this constantly and I'll say it again. I truly believe no matter how crazy our industry gets, if you prioritize your audience needs, you can't go wrong, right? You always just want to keep them at the center of the work that you're doing. And that's something I really pride myself on. And again, keeping it simple and straightforward. Like, what do they need in that moment? Supply it. So that is one part of it, is trend forecasting and creating, that's more on the evergreen side, but those explainers where you're getting ahead of it, right? So, and this plays into the update later, because ideally, just due to bandwidth issues that newsrooms will have, right? You don't want to be like creating all of your explainers on the fly where it's like, okay, I'm just kind of waiting around. And then it's like, this big news happened. Oh my God. And then you have to do it. Those moments will come up. Don't get me wrong. And it's actually kind of exciting. I've been in that position many times. And so I was like, oh my goodness, like what's going on? But ideally, as much as you can predict where the trend is going, that is going to ease the update process later. I'll give you a good example of that, like from my time at ESPN. I was very proud of this one because it just showed like why this formula can work. So again, being a big sports fan, you just know certain tentpoles that when there's related breaking news, that particular question is going to trend. And when we were first setting up this initiative, we thought of those, you could call them like low-hanging fruit, but it was things where like, hey, we know that this is reliable based off of the way the news cycle has behaved in the past. And a few of those that we did on football, obviously king, in the US. So we really targeted football, but we had, the longest tenured college football coaches and NFL coaches of all time. And then we also had the winningest in terms of championships, like who has won the most championships on both the college football and the NFL side. We had these posts, we created them. There wasn't breaking news technically at the time when they were going up. It was just, hey, we want to have these. We'll get them sourced in the correct way, and they're ready, they're on reserve. And then I love this. It just really proved like why this content still is a place. There was a 48-hour window where Nick Saban left Alabama. And then Bill Belichick was like, hold my beer. I'm also going to leave the Patriots. And it was crazy. It was like bananas. It was like, oh my God, this is a bonanza for our explainer content. But it really shows what you were asking, John, because it's like we had these posts. We did not have to completely work up these posts. They were done. They were largely, like good to exist the way that they were. All we had to do was go in, refresh those individual sections on those legends that were in the news, and then recirculate them. Because that's really the key. The second part of like updating is that you're updating it, getting it that fresh information that people need, but then you're recirculating it. So to go into like a little bit more detail on how to make updates count in news, you want to be thinking, because this really goes to the bigger industry side of this, right? Going back to what no longer works in SEO, right? Now we know that search performance because of AI overviews really isn't defined, and it isn't a be all end all with the first page of Google. You can't view it that way. That just doesn't work anymore because we know how volatile it is. And there is no brand that can just rely on that alone. So it goes hand in hand with the update process. You want to be really aware of what content do I already have. When that breaking news hits, how can I refresh it? How can I give it the information that it needs? And then recirculation is the very close next step after that. So this is going to really
Okay.
vary depending on what your brand is, but that could be, okay, I created this off of a search trigger. I'm going to, do everything I can to make it pop on Google AI overviews, but then I might recirculate it via my app, via a newsletter, via social media channels. If it makes sense, create, an accompanying video that might be able to pop on YouTube, like literally flooding, the zone in the channels that make the most sense. Because now, and this is the way I've been putting it to people, I think it's time that, SEO strategists are not just SEO people anymore. We're audience people. And we have to be thinking bigger because of, this. And, I do like to look at it as an exciting challenge. I'm just an eternal optimist. So I'm like, I'm still going to do things that can potentially pop there, but I'm not going to stop there. I need to think. And that really plays into the update process, because when that related breaking news happens, you need to be updating, but then following that up quite quickly with recirculation in an effective way. And then I have to mention that was off of the evergreen strategy, which I think is really smart, is when you're trend forecasting. But obviously you're also going to have those breaking news windows where it's just
Right.
like,
Yeah.
hey, this is what my team did all the time. It's what I would recommend. I mean, you're balancing the two. So you're trying to forecast as much as you can, get that content already up and ready to go. But then you're also going to have those fun moments where it's like, we didn't see this coming. We're going to react to it. One of my favorite moments that was like that, during my time at ESPN was, Rory McIlroy at the Masters. We didn't necessarily see that he was going to get a career Grand Slam at that event. And then once we saw that that was starting to trend because he was getting closer and closer to that milestone, we did a breakout explainer on that. And then that's where you still are trend forecasting, just in a tighter window. You're like, hey, I think he really might do this. And then he did eventually accomplish it. We had that corresponding piece of content, and we were able to, really give the people what they wanted in that window. And the other great part about it is that in the future, because, hopefully there will be other golfers that will get a career Grand Slam, we will already have that piece of content. So then it all goes back to the beginning, and it's like that becomes an evergreen piece of content that you then can loop into the bigger update process. So yeah, I can't stress enough, just through like testing this really extensively over the last 2.5 years, the updates make a giant difference. One other good example of this that I would bring up would be, if you're dealing with something where it's like a longer event cycle where you can continuously update and refresh something, that's going to really benefit you. One of my favorite examples of that I did at ESPN was, again, you're seeing where the trend is going to go. It's a pretty simple thing to start with. Which NBA teams have never won a championship? That's just a question that people have. We created that article. It was not related to breaking news at the time, but then we were fortunate, unfortunate for them because they didn't end up finishing it. But the Pacers had an incredible run last season, and they had never won a championship. And so everyone was consistently searching for that as they advanced further and further and further. We updated that article on a regular basis. Another thing that I would bring up, because you had asked about like update best practices, would be when you're updating these pieces, yes, you want to go in and add new information, but also make sure you're adding in fresh links, right? So every single time they would advance to another stage, it would be, here is the link out to the latest, newser that we have on this. Like, we're providing that extra context and that back end sort of link juice. And so we would do that consistently. And we rode that throughout like the entire postseason, until unfortunately they didn't, ultimately secure it. But it was incredible to hold on to that AI overview placement off of that, and they were definitely acknowledging the fact that like we were going in and making sure it was as fresh as possible. So yeah, it's a process.
Going back to your comment about, SEO specialists no longer just specializing in SEO, but really focusing on your audience. I think it's a really great segue into, how we've heard about how social media and search has evolved quite a bit.
100%.
We've seen we've seen how TikTok has now become the search engine for some users. And so if you had to design a strategy that was starting from TikTok and not from Google, how would you change the way that you plan and choose topics, or the different creative formats, or your on-page structure?
Well, I love the fact that you brought this up, because I think like where I would take that question would be just the overall discussion of multimodal search and what that means, right? I think it's really important to include it in any kind of a discussion like this, because that is is why we have to think of, TikTok in a different way, YouTube in a different way, Reddit in a different way, because we bring it back to the source, right? What do Google search results look like these days? They look like this insane amalgamation of you can see a Reddit result leading a knowledge panel up at the top. Same thing with YouTube. You might see that. It obviously, it makes sense when they have actual partnerships with Google that happens more often. But TikTok would play into it in that same sort of way, where, now the feed that you see of different featured things in search results is so much more diverse than it used to be. And that's why another big thing that I would really stress to anyone who works in news SEO, and I'm glad you brought up the audience thing again, because it's so important, is going back to our conversation around what previously worked, but now isn't quite as, applicable. I think for a while, and having been in this industry as long as I have, SEOs working with other departments, whether that be social or newsletters or whatever it might be, it was never that there was any sort of negativity, but I think it may have come off as this is optional, right? It's okay, we're doing our thing over here, you're doing your thing over here, we're supportive of each other, but we're kind of in our own silos, right? And it's I'm going to do my thing over here, you're going to do your thing, and maybe occasionally we'll mesh. Your TikTok question makes me think of this though, because this is why that no longer can exist. With the challenges that we have on the first page of Google, we have to be creating and recirculating content anywhere and everywhere that our readers are. And if our readers are on TikTok, we need to be creating content that connects with those search themes on that channel. If they're on YouTube, we need to do the same thing. If they're on Reddit, we need to do the same thing. It's thinking so much bigger. So that's really square one when you were saying coming up with the strategy around it. I would say that applies to TikTok or any other platform that's out there, is any news SEO should be setting up those collaborative, meetings with those other departments and making it clear this is no longer optional the way that it once was. This is a necessity, because here are, and I would probably, let's go back to receipts. I would probably come ready with receipts of showing and really explaining to folks, and going back to training, here are examples of how, your content that you're creating for YouTube or for Reddit or for TikTok, whatever it might be, this is in my search results. So here's the direct connection between us. And then that's where, just to bring it all together, again, this would apply to TikTok or any other platform we're discussing, you're finding that shared ground. So you're not duplicating efforts. You're ideally creating content for all of those platforms that can be very complementary. And that's where you're maximizing your brand awareness at every corner, right? That's what's really important. We can't exist in silos anymore. And I would really stress that the best newsrooms are really thinking about that right now, because, another big thing that's changing with the rise of zero click search and, AI overviews and declining click-through rates and everything like that is that, the way that we define search performance is shifting, right? Do my best to not become too scared or to run away from that. But instead you have to pivot your perspective, right? That it might not, and I know this from working in newsrooms, obviously page views, uniques, all of these things are still going to be important. They're not at all out of the conversation, but overall brand visibility is much more important now, right? So whether that's with an AI overview where, okay, maybe you're not necessarily getting the click, but if you're in that AI overview often enough, you can be, driving. Obviously, just overall brand visibility helps. You're there. I also believe psychologically, when your readers, your fans see you in that module often enough, that fosters trust, that kind of breeds into your EEAT over time. So I would definitely, push that in this era, we need to be creating maximum exposure every opportunity that we can get. Where I would start square one with creating a strategy, whether that be for TikTok or for YouTube, just a cross-platform search strategy would be getting everybody in the same room. And then a big part of that truly is getting top-down investment in it as well, and top-down, buy-in, where it's okay, this isn't optional. This is something that we need to be a united front on. And then really creating a more collaborative environment for that. Because it did previously, kind of work that way where you could get away with your silos. But if you want to really rise to the occasion and meet your readers in those windows when they need that information the most, you got to hit all of those channels. So yeah, that would be just square one. And obviously that could be a whole other chat of how you would expand that. But I think you just have to think bigger and really be in sync across all of those channels.
I was curious around your approach to TikTok keyword research. Is that something that you've, I don't know, played around with or worked with other teams to try to get some knowledge around? Or
Yeah. Yeah. So my favorite way, just being straight up, that I like to do keyword research on TikTok is I'm a big fan of just like the search bar. Like when I see things that are, I always love to see where like there's the cross-platform juice going on, and it's like if
Mhm.
something is popping on traditional Google search or I'm seeing it in Google Trends, I like to do that separate search in TikTok and then see what the drop-down menu says. Try to find some other angles. Obviously, for any brand that is targeting Gen Z or younger demographics, that's going to be a really important practice, right? Of like on that particular platform, how are people taking whatever this topic is? A really fun one recently, because I was doing daily trend reports for it where I did that quite a bit, was the Olympics, right? It's really interesting to see like what would the TikTok audience be looking for around the Olympics versus like Google Trends. There actually what were like some interesting divides with that, but it didn't mean that like if I created something off of what I saw on TikTok that it couldn't potentially resonate with a more traditional like Google search, Google Trends sort of audience. So I know this whole time I've definitely promoted like not overcomplicating it, but that really is one of my favorite ways to conduct research is to just go off of like, what am I already looking into when it comes to Google Trends? And then I do that not only with TikTok, but you can use YouTube in the same way. Like just go into a search bar, look it up, see what the drop down menu says, and, find those other like cross platform opportunities. So obviously, it's all just coming together to give you the best idea of what do people care the most across different platforms. Yeah. So that's my simple way of doing it personally. But and I have found some really cool opportunities that way that maybe wouldn't have popped up in Google Trends or on other, within other tools that I was using.
Yeah, we lead trainings for clients, of course, very much like you probably do in-house. And when we get to the keyword research section, we always have a slide. It's like, here's your easiest way. Just go to Google and start typing in what it
It's
is you're
me.
looking for. Don't overcomplicate it. Like Google will tell you what other people are looking for. You may not get the search volume, but you have a pretty good signal there.
It's nice.
I wanted to
It's
quick,
nice.
yeah, super easy. I wanted to quickly go back to the explainer hub, mainly around the internal linking. So just sticking with the Pacers example, how are you guys finding internal, or how are you thinking about building the authority of that piece? So for example, I could imagine you have a ton of Reggie Miller content, obviously didn't win, had some great battles with the Bulls and others, but would you go back like that far to content to point those internal links to a piece like that? Or is it something where you're sort of building out a hub and all of that sort of works together?
It's a really good point. So I'm not at all dismissing that sort of strategy for what that would mean. Like I see exactly what you're saying. The reason why, and I think it really depends on your brand, right? For us, I know like when we were in that sort of window, we were going to get the most search traction with linking back to more current content. It's just the way that like our CMS worked and, kind of knowing older like it wouldn't have really been
Yep.
an
Yeah.
option for us to do that. But that being said, that was our way of looking at it and that's why, like I said that like in that intro paragraph, you're making sure that you're linking out to that expert content that was from our in-house team that was providing all of the latest, information that people would need to know. And then the other part of it too is on the flip side, we would be encouraging whether that was like in the newser that we had, that was just like the breakout news of, the Pacers made it to whatever it is, or if it was in more of like a standalone sort of feature on what was going on, that you're linking back to the explainer that we had, right? So it goes both ways. And that was really what it is. I guess it's been the theme of our whole chat, but like with us, that more simple approach to it of really prioritizing more of the current content made the most sense. But that could really vary depending on your brand, right? If you were a brand where like, your legacy content carried like that kind of weight, then I think you could certainly explore that. Just for us and knowing like the way that we function, which was in much more of a kind of like breaking news sort of pace, we were going to get the most value and like link equity out of, really prioritizing that like recent content. But the two-way stream was really important. So whenever we could, obviously, we were linking back to our in-house expert coverage in our intro and in our content, but we also wanted that in the opposite direction. So when we could add in
Got
our
it.
explainer, we wanted it to be, featured in those other pieces. So it's all very cyclical.
Got it. Got it. I was curious around that explainer hub approach from an eat perspective. Like how were you guys thinking about that? Well, I don't know, maybe even a level up from there in the age of LLMs. Do you how are you viewing EAT? Is it still something that's important? Were you seeing those signals play out for ESPN and others?
Yeah. So I know that, and I always say, like, everyone is entitled, to their own opinion. I know that I've read some things in different places where, there's been some arguments of like the role of service journalism and the role of like utility content, and when LLMs can kind of gobble it up and reproduce it, like, it does it still have the same value? Like, I absolutely acknowledge like those arguments, and I get where they're coming from. I just was extremely proud to represent a brand like ESPN, and I felt every single day that because of the authority and the longstanding trust that we had with our fans, which truly predated our website, even. I mean, it goes back to like our on-air like legacy that we have with our fans positively influences the brand traffic that we get now online. I just firmly stand in this place of, if you have that kind of longstanding connection and builds up trust with your readers, with your fans, with your users, you have an obligation to, in the age of LLMs, where we all know inaccuracies are frequent enough that it's concerning, and people are looking up things in timely windows and being led in different directions. You have that responsibility to provide accurate information, and I really viewed that as an obligation and a responsibility, actually, that I was proud to have with this content that we were creating. I can also tell you, from like being embedded in the sports world now for the last several years, sports fans are statisticians, and they notice when like
True.
even the smallest little thing is off in a list. So that was what drove me even further. I mean, my brother is the biggest sports fan that I know, and he will absolutely notice if even like the smallest thing is off. So I really took that as a responsibility that I wanted to rise to the occasion for with this content. I think there's absolutely still a place for it. And to go back to your question about EEAT, we did see the payoff from that. In a lot of those windows where LLMs would be saying wonky things, and I ran a lot of tests, and it's like, hey, what is it pulling in? Our source could be the one in that lineup that was correct. And I really believe over time that fuels long-term loyalty. That makes people want to come back and be, you can get more repeat visitors that way. And we really did see the payoff. I still absolutely believe in EEAT. I think it's more important than ever, because isn't that what journalism is all about? Is that you are serving information to your readers in the windows when they need it the most. And this would obviously be even more critical. I can reflect back a few jobs, but when I was at the LA Times, and I mean, I was actually like pre-AI overviews and everything like that. It'd be interesting to go back to that time, like now, but we were dealing with life or death situations there, like wildfires, and
Right, yeah.
shootings. And I mean, when you work in hard news, I still have many friends who work on the hard news side. No, I see similar value, where it's like, especially if a wildfire is quickly spreading throughout a city, I mean, you need to know definitively what the evacuation zones are, and you need to be providing that information. So I do absolutely understand the AI concerns, and zero click is very real, but that's where I think it all comes back together in the middle, right, of what we were talking about, of it isn't a reason to stop doing it, because that's what journalism is, and that's why we're here doing the work that we do every single day. But we do have to think bigger about how do we reach our audiences everywhere they are. I've actually really loved this conversation because I think it's all connected. That's why, like, your great question, Constance, about TikTok strategy and like these other platforms that we should be thinking about. That's why it isn't just about Google anymore. We need to be taking these search triggers. That's what's still there. That's why I firmly believe search isn't dead until people stop searching for information, which I don't imagine happening anytime soon. But we need to take search triggers and then maximize the potential reach of where, we can connect with our audiences. We need to be anywhere and everywhere that they consume content. And that brings us back to the audience point, right? Like it's becoming more of an audience strategist versus just traditional search. But yeah, EEAT, absolutely. It is something that has driven every day of my news career. And I'm really proud of that. And I've been so fortunate to work for a variety of places where I've taken our reputations very seriously, and I've wanted to provide that information, to readers in the windows when they need it most. So yeah, I definitely saw the payoff of that. And that's why I've continued to advocate for it.
Love that. I know we're bumping up against time. Maybe we jump to a couple of quick rapid fire questions.
Sure. Yeah, I love it.
All right. What's the most underrated SEO metric in a newsroom?
Ooh, SEO metric. That's interesting. I don't know. In terms of being underrated, again, like I think you just need to be thinking about, any type of signal that shows that you got a performance, the performance that you were looking for. And the most traditional ones, I mean, that always come to mind for people are like page views, clicks, like unique visitors, things like that. But something that I'm always curious about is if you do more of like a hub page for something, then overall like time spent on the page, I think can be really
Okay,
important. Like
sure.
repeat visits, I think can be really important when you're doing more like evergreen content. Like, is this a resource that people are coming back to again and again and again? Working in the spaces that I have, I think that actually would be a really good one because a lot of the time, this actually is a good one. In breaking news, with many newsrooms, obviously, it takes precedence. It does. It's like we create breaking news content. It has an expiration date. It goes up, it goes down, and it's gone. I do like when it comes to SEO because I truly believe evergreen still has a place. It just has to be coordinated correctly. That repeat visits and like, is that something that people are coming back to again and again and again can prove the value of a utility piece of content. So that's why like when, I'm a big fan of like landing pages, like where that throughout like an extended event cycle, this is something that's going to be continuously refreshed and people come back to. That would be one metric where like I would pay closer attention to that because so often in news we can get really caught up in the like immediate aftermath of a story. A lot of the way newsrooms churn out content is in that way where it's like up,
Right.
down, and then it drops off. But if you're thinking more about like evergreen strategy, I really do like the repeat visits. Is this something that people are consistently, finding value in? Because that really helps to influence what content I would pursue in the future.
What's your favorite tentpole to prepare for?
Oh my
Olympics,
God,
Super
that's such
Bowl?
a big question. That's like picking my favorite child. I love tentpole events. It's like my favorite thing that I've done. I don't know. I guess now that I've been in the sports world, obviously like sports, just come straight to mind because I love how unifying they are. I love how they can bring together from people from so many different backgrounds. It's very fresh in my mind, but I would just call it out. Like I've done 2 Olympic cycles now at ESPN, and I had done the Olympics prior to that at other places where I had worked. But I always love an event like the Olympics because it's so global and there are so many possibilities when it comes to content of how you can target people not only in like your specific region, but worldwide. And so any kind of
Mhm.
events like that, I think are really fun to play around with just to see like what can be a little bit more like local versus what is more of like the grand scheme of things. And again, it's great ground for utility content, which I love. I'm also just a pop culture junkie. So, anyone who knows me would know that I would be remiss to not say that, I love working the Oscars. I love working the Grammys. I love award shows. I really do. Those are some of the most chaotic and fun news nights of my life that I've ever had. But I really do love like responding to things in real time, tracking trends, elections in a similar way, just because it's so live in the moment and you don't know what's
Right.
going to happen. And I think I may have previously told you, John, but you have to like a certain amount of chaos to do this type of work. And I know that I'm one of those people because I get very fired up in those moments where I'm excited to jump on things or to do a quick turn explainer or to react to something. So yeah, I've really enjoyed elections. I've enjoyed those, award shows when they've popped up. I love those large scale sporting events. Really, yeah, just temple events in general have been one of my absolute favorite parts of my work. So there would be many
I,
examples.
I didn't actually realize you were at E the same time that I was at NBC Universal.
Oh my
So I'm
God,
wondering if we
no way.
worked on the
Okay.
same Olympic efforts there. We might have been in the
Maybe.
same room together. Who
That's
knows?
so
Maybe.
funny.
Who
That's
knows? Who
wild.
knows? It's a small world. It really is.
It really is. We'll end on this one because I know we
Sure.
have a hard stop. Who is your March Madness pick?
Oh man, March. Well, okay.
Put you on the spot.
Let's see. Okay. I come from a very proud, USC Trojan family. So I always have a soft spot for them in any sort of, sporting event cycle. Yeah, always them. My family would hate me for saying this though, just because I have always immensely respected Gino and the UConn, ladies on the women's basketball side. They're having a historic season right now. And
Again.
I love when history is made again, and his streak is incredible. And I have immense respect for that institution and what he's built. So I know some people can say it's boring to root for, the dominant one, but I really do love when history is made. So they might have to be, kind of my lock on the women's side, just because it literally before I joined ESPN, the biggest thing that I knew about Connecticut was the UConn women's basketball team. And I say that with pride. That was the biggest thing I knew about the state because I had followed it since I was a kid. And then on the men's side, I'm always open. I mean, I would say the same allegiance, just generally to like USC. But, I actually went to University of Colorado at Boulder, for my undergrad. So those are my allegiances that I always have. I like the standards. I like, the Dukes and, those types of teams where you just, one of my best friends went to KU. I always, have a soft spot for KU when this time of the year comes around. So I always say I vote for the best basketball possible. I'm not necessarily I love diehard fandoms and I love all of my friends who have those allegiances. I have my own as well. But at the end of the day, if I get like great basketball, I also love Cinderella stories and there are surprises in there. Like that's what I'm rooting for versus more of a I have an absolute lock, even though I love friends like that who are very passionate about it. So I'm rooting for great basketball on both the men's and the women's side.
Love it. Love it. Well, Louisa, this has been an absolute pleasure. I'm so happy that we're finally able to make this work. And let our listeners know where they can find you. And are you going to be speaking anywhere coming up?
Yeah. So, right now I'm in a little bit of a transitional period, from this job that I was in. I was living in Connecticut. I'm moving back to Los Angeles. I'll be there, starting in April of 2026. So I'm currently focusing on, completing that move, but I am very active on LinkedIn. That's always a really good place to meet me. Just in terms if you want to jump into my DMs or if you have any cool projects that you're working on. I'm very much mapping out the next phase of my career from the West Coast. So would love to chat further on LinkedIn. And public speaking has always been a huge passion of mine. So looking forward to jumping back into that, once I get through this kind of transitional phase that I'm in, but always open to discussions. And if anyone wants to chat further, you can definitely reach me on LinkedIn.
Well, thanks again for joining us on the Page 2 podcast. And for those who are listening, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure. Have a great day. Thank you.